Have you ever met someone who consistently refers to themselves in the third person? I remember meeting someone like this when I was a technical scuba diving instructor in Cayman Islands. From the first day of his training, he referred to himself in the third person, saying things like, "John thinks that's a great idea," or "John doesn't like that kind of fish." At first, I thought it was just a quirk, but as I got to know him better, I realized that there was something deeper going on. As it turns out, referring to oneself in the third person is a common trait among people with narcissistic personality disorder. Why narcissists refer to themselves in the third person? Although there is a personality disorder called dissociative disorder that the narcissist could suffer from, often for the narcissist, it is more of a defense mechanism used to protect their fragile ego, image, and self-worth. By talking about themselves in the third person, they can distance themselves from their unwanted or shameful behaviors, image, memories, and emotions. This can serve several purposes, which includes avoiding responsibility and shame. Some narcissists will talk about their past actions and even parts of their life in the third person to avoid shame and accountability. John once said, "John was weak and cried a lot when he was a child. He was a really pathetic person. I'm nothing like him." By talking about his past as if it was a different person, John attempted to distance himself from the shame he felt for how he was as a child. He once was rude to another guest, and when the guest called him out on it, he responded with, "John is sorry he hurt your feelings." It is only years later that I learned that John had distanced himself from his actions as well as his false apology. He did not even mention what he did to upset the person. Talking about himself in the third person and giving an apology like this allowed him to protect his fragile ego, as it was not him that upset the person, and it was not him giving an apology. If he was more covert, he may have tried to slip in some victimhood and may have said, "John never meant to hurt anyone. He's going through a tough time with his scuba diving training and didn't know how to handle things." Once, another guest's wife secretly came to the resort and caught him diving in places other than the ocean. They had an argument outside on the balcony, and he commented, "It's not my fault I slept with her. Did you see how hot she is?" I'm sure John would have changed the I with his name and used the exact same line if he was married. If he was more covert, he may have said, "It's not like John wanted to be unfaithful. He was just helpless against her seduction and beauty." When presented with consequences of their actions, many narcissists will disassociate from their behaviors and act as if it was a different person doing it, even if it was 10 seconds ago. By claiming it is a different person they think and feel, they should not and cannot be held responsible for those actions, as it was not them. They may even state, "But how can he still be mad at me? I'm a new person now," or "I have changed." They often shift the focus away from their actions to them supposedly having changed, as if them changing frees them from any responsibility. Comment below if you have ever dealt with a narcissistic person who constantly referred to themselves in the third person. Self-aggrandizement. Many narcissists use self-aggrandizement to boost their ego, sense of power, and image by referring to their accomplishments, talents, or importance. By talking about themselves in the third person, the narcissist becomes a supporting character in their own mythical story. In their mind, it is not them beating their chest, but someone else who is supporting their claims of brilliance and specialness, even if it is themselves talking about themselves. This also allows them to brag while trying to appear not to do so. John used to say, "John is an amazing scuba diver. Everyone is always impressed by his skills and respect his opinions." Saying it in the third person allowed him to gain admiration and attention from others while avoiding the appearance of being too self-centered or arrogant. If he was more covert in his narcissism, he may not have been so open and may have said, "John doesn't like to brag, but he's been recognized to be an expert scuba diver." This may have made him appear humble while getting the attention he wanted. Self-devaluing. Narcissists hate to admit they made mistakes or have flaws, but when they do, some will turn it around to still boost their ego or gain sympathy and attention. As part of his training, John had to deploy a bag underwater to serve as a surface marker for topside support. The bag is attached to a reel and you have to be careful not to get yourself entangled in the line as well as make sure the reel runs freely. John did not properly free the clutch on his reel, which was operated with a thumb-controlled lever. The bag shot up and pulled him to the surface a foot or two before he let go of the reel. When we got to the surface, he commented, "John is so stupid, he cannot even properly disengage the reel's clutch. But damn, did you see how perfectly he filled the bag with air?" In one sentence, he managed to distance himself from a mistake that he made and then redirected the focus from his mistake to something else he did well. If he was more covert, I'm sure he would have tried to get sympathy. He may have said, "John is so useless, he can't do anything right." This would have been a hint for me to point out something he does well in an attempt to get validation and shift the focus away from his mistake. He may even have tried to shift blame and may have said, "John is so useless, he cannot even deploy a bag properly. I wish he had a proper instructor who could help him." Or he could have played the victim and presented himself as weak or helpless in order to elicit sympathy or attention, which covert narcissists love to do. He may then have said, "John just cannot handle the pace of a class. He's never going to get it right." This, at the surface, makes it look like he's putting himself down, but in fact, it is shifting blame by subtly claiming he is not being taught correctly. So, it's all the instructor's fault, while at the same time distancing himself from his failure by talking about himself in the third person. Sometimes a narcissist will withhold accomplishments or talents in order to avoid appearing arrogant or draw attention to themselves. John was too grandiose for this, but if he wanted to appear more humble, he may have said after I thanked him for giving me a ride home after work, "Oh, it was nothing, anyone could have done it. John's just glad he could help." Instead of what he said, "John does not abandon any person in need." Note that both overt and covert narcissists could use any tactic to manipulate people. However, in general, overt narcissists are more likely to use self-deprecating humor or false humility as a way to maintain their sense of superiority, while covert narcissists are more likely to engage in negative self-talk or present themselves as weak or helpless in order to gain sympathy or avoid scrutiny. Projection. Projection is a defense mechanism that narcissists commonly use to avoid facing their own flaws and shortcomings. Normally they would project their flaws, mistakes, shortcomings, and what they hate about themselves onto others and then attack that person. This way they can, in a way, vent their shame or anger for those things in them while still maintaining their image of perfection. If they do it in the third person, they still distance themselves from their own actions, but also try to minimize their behaviors by including themselves in a group. So now they are part of a special group of people who does these actions instead of just a narcissist alone doing it. In a way, it helps them to justify their actions by claiming others do this as well. John did not do this as far as I can recall, but if he wanted to, he could have said, "You can't trust anyone these days. People like John are only out for themselves." By including the part people like would have allowed him to distance himself from any selfish behaviors he had or that were pointed out to him, while also claiming that other people did it as well. If he was more covert, he may have said, "It is so sad to see people like John who are so desperate for attention." Both statements would have allowed him to avoid taking responsibility for his behaviors or admit his flaws while still maintaining a sense of superiority and control. Protecting their fragile ego. Ego and image is a massive deal for a narcissist. If there is a possibility of failure, then a narcissist may distance themselves from that possible future failure by talking about their goals or objectives in the third person. John did this in the beginning of the course by saying, "John is going to easily ace this course." By doing this, he created a mental separation between his current self and his future self he was describing. As he did pass, he was able to take credit for his achievements, which drastically bolstered his image. But had he failed, he could have protected his ego and image by claiming he never said he was going to ace the course, but that John did, and he is not that John, which would have allowed him to avoid feeling the full impact of failing the course. Do narcissists think others are fooled? Before I learned more about narcissism, I used to wonder if these people think other people are stupid, and that they don't realize that the person is referring to themselves. As it turns out, a few actually do think people are stupid and won't realize it. However, narcissists often struggle with understanding other people's thoughts and perspective, which is known as theory of mind. The narcissist frequently assumes that other people see things the same way they do. Thus, if a narcissist in their mind disassociates themselves from their actions or part of their life and see themselves as a different person, they assume others do the same. Some narcissists also have a tendency towards magical thinking and believe that their thoughts and desires have a power to shape reality or directly influence people, external events, or circumstances. As a result, a narcissist could then believe that if they think of themselves in the third person, others will naturally think the same and distance the narcissist from their negative actions or mistakes. However, for some the shame and fear of abandonment is so great that even though they know others know they are referring to themselves, they cannot mentally associate with their actions or flaws and have to talk about themselves in the third person to protect their fragile ego and self-image. Referring to themselves in the third person is but one of many things a narcissist do, and a relationship with a narcissist is often a roller coaster of emotions. See the video suggested to you now to learn more about the narcissistic relationship cycle that goes into more detail about love bombing, devaluing, and the discard stages in a relationship.